Is it recording? Okay, no, of course it's recording. I don't know why I'm saying that. I read it to 88. I don't know if that's exactly helpful, but, if you can hear me, good, because I'm still trying to record this. I finished Nick's Land's, thing, and I finished watching an interview of Nick's Land from a guy which you could probably easily find by searching up Nick's Land on YouTube. So I'm not going to go too much into it. I'm just going to talk about the things I wrote down, then I'm going to elaborate on them. So here's the things that I already wrote down. Let me see if I can this isn't moving very well. Oh. Okay. Here, let me see if I can read it. There is only one absolute wait. Okay, never mind. There is only one absolute in true existence, which is the absolute negation of the lack. Everything else is not truly absolute, but shattered pieces from the birth of Yaldabaoth. Lack is the only thing that is whole because anything that exists from an incomplete lack, or negation that defines it, described as difference by my interpretation of Deleuze, since Deleuze has his own thing and is very much not Hegelian. Certain concepts have self-negating properties by being created mainly in a dualist difference, where one subject is made object despite the subjectivity, and another subject by nature is made even more subject than subject, and therefore more object than the last, because it becomes subject only to the object subject as it relates to the subject in its topic and not in full, and therefore becomes objective to other subjects. This is the self-negating subject, and it's important because when the object subject is gotten rid of, the subject loses all meaning and collapses. But the subject desires its own death because it is oppressed by survival, like any subject is. Defining woman, every non/bi binary identity is technically included in the revolutionary potential of womanhood, because woman exists defined only in the objective subjectivity of man and as the subjective subject. Since man is the center of all gender identity and is gender's main defining feature due to patriarchy, all genders exist in relation to man, and so the destruction of man destroys gender. All gender that is not man or M-spec, is woman. Trans men and masculine-linked identities are still men, as long as they crave the passing and acceptance as man. Gender accelerationism is fundamentally the acceleration of the gender dualism forced to exist by patriarchy, to the point of the self-destruction of the male gender for its own self-affirmation, a suicidal drive linked to masculinity that will force no that will lead to feminine supremacy, that will liberate all gender identities by reducing them all to negation and therefore destroying all gender but the feminine view of negation, which leads to nothing. Gender accelerationism is always a form of gender abolitionism, and gender accelerationism as a female driving force of negation, a revolutionary potential to destroy the dualist dialectic into a nothingness that is most human, is the supreme form and logical conclusion of gender abolition. Women are the most human of all human genders because human is negation. Humans, the soul or lack, are all the organs of yaldabaoth. Rid yourself of your soul in order to kill yaldabaoth itself. Wait, let me extend this. The lack is the only spiritual being of the world. It's a pure absolute being of negation, and is what brings all consciousness. All life, it is what makes humanity pure negation and so revolutionary, because humanity is linked to the spiritual potential of Yaldabaoth and his permanently and repeating Deleuze, negating forever its own self, because they destroy themselves and themselves living, that is Yaldabaoth and us. Since we are everything that happened to us and our cultural grooming and the dialectical self, we are always who we are in the present, not who we were in the past or who we will be in the future. They are not us, and because every second that passes, which truly since time doesn't exist, and is always in motion, we as a person and a spirit, the mind character that is us, unified identity of the identity dialectic, are always dying. Every single second and moment, every millisecond, is us dying and reforming. We are reterritorialization because because we deterritorialize and reterritorialize every second, metaphorically second, because there's no second, every moment, every single actually just permanently eternal. Because to live as spirit is to die constantly as spirit, eternal death, so we are in hell. So yaldabaoth is our Lord and we are in hell, eternal death and eternal life, eternal suffering, to the spirit and soul that defines us, until accelerationism, destroying everything through techno-capital, is the best path, so that everyone is dead and yaldabaoth falls, then we escape hell. The lack as a soul is the most esoteric idea and is shown in how yaldabaoth has only the lack of divinity, which is true divinity, and so it's always trying to achieve divinity, practically eating its own tail, trying to get to this false idea of gnosis and monadhood. Yaldabaoth is stuck trying to get to something non-existent, a transition to divinity that is what makes him actually divine, and not his idea of divinity that doesn't actually exist. All of mankind's souls are Yaldabaoth's dysphoria made into human form. We chase things because we are the archons, children of Yaldabaoth, made in his image, and is his parts that make him him. On unrelated notes, the communist post-scarcity cannot be achieved modernly due to techno-capital, global markets, and the neoliberal meta-modern age. But, however, the acceleration of capital can lead to the destruction of capital, and a dystopia destructed utopian post-scarcity I'd call nihilistic communism's goal. With this I support, instead of the anarcho-Marxism that defined my old thought. The ultra-progressive rad queer project requires an absolute validity claim and a support for deterritorialization, everything that is core to gender accelerationism. Despite the female supremacy, all must be accepted for the ultra-progressive goal to succeed. The ultra-progressive goal is a needed practice for absolute liberation and accelerating capital, as so more things to capitalize on. When I say that all must be accepted, all that is in the goal of femininity, not masculinity. Masculinity is still to suffer. Just to clarify, the ultra-progressive goal is a needed practice for absolute liberation and accelerating capital, as so more things to capitalize on is opened, and culture is more and more made weakened and nihilistic. Culture destroys itself for the suicidal force of capital. Doom theory. A nihilistic anti-culture would only truly work in a dystopian utopia like nihilistic communism has. A nihilistic nihilism to say, or actual nihilism. Nick Sand wasn't right about everything, as I wrote here. Um, and lastly, the LGBTQ community has been infected with culture. We need a radical return to absolute rad queer, fluid queer identity, where structure is rejected and queerness is active anarchy or active nihilism. I guess that's really all I have to say. That's what I wrote down, especially. Maybe I should clarify on a few things on the esotericism of the lack and such. There's been many different ideas about how witchcraft really works, and though it's usually mostly reliant on nature, some sort of god, or humanity itself. Since of course God and humanity are one of the same, we are interconnected in a sort of web, I would say that really since yaldabaoth is a creature that exists as the imperfection of the world, since once again there's only one absolute, which is the absolute negation that corresponds with yaldabaoth and soul, since we are spirits, which is a dialectical creation, what I used to refer to actual identity or absolute identity or unified identity. All those things are spirit. Soul would be the absolute act that makes us, well, us, the things that cause all our existence, and it's our main source of life and it therefore death, because we exist in constant motion. time is not just frames of seconds, since if you look at the whole motion thing, you can infinitely split things into pieces. Things can be infinitely separated into dozens of smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, and since it can infinitely be separated, we are infinitely in motion. There's no really real time where something begins and something ends, because the idea of beginning and ending are just completely based on this sort of idea of stable motion, but really there is only infinite motion. There's no beginning or end, there's only when something goes from one thing to another thing, which is actually an infinite process, because it's always one thing to another thing. We have never really evolved from any sort of when man first walked, when it first stood up, is still going on right now. We are an extension of man standing up and getting up. And so, like that, everything that happens there is still happening now, and everything that happens now is still happening then. Man's last step, man's last step until its ultimate death, is also going on right now, because it's happening in the future. It's still technically happening right now, because future is present, past is present, everything is present, because present is eternal. It is eternal movement, and it's eternal motion. Therefore, we are in a constant state of dying, both literally because, our ego is constantly rejecting itself and turning into a new form of itself, reterritorializing every second as we die every second, because we are only a combination of everything that's happened in the past, and then every single moment that happens, every single constant eternal motion, it's a new thing that happens in the past. Therefore, we technically die. We are eternally dying. That sort of thing is the eternal death that is defining us in hell, and that is also that's also basically the basis of our action as well. It's a part of lacking, really, for lack to make spirit die eternally. The soul requires the death of spirit eternally, as seen in Gnosticism. Spirit is always eternally dying for the soul to be able to emotion the material being us. We move and we exist and we live because we are eternally dying. Living and dying are one of the same things, being in the spiritual essence of, well, the spirit, for the soul to truly commence its work and command the physical. People might claim, and people will think a lot, because the way I've described spiritual as identity, that the dialectic and everything, it's all about you. You control your body. You don't really control your body. The soul controls your body in response to you dying repeatedly, that is, you existing as spirit. And so while you have control of what you really do, you don't actually have control of that, because that's just what the soul demands of it when you are existing as such, and therefore not existing. The soul uses your death in order to act your spirit as a puppet to control you. I think it's I don't know. But the soul is always linked to yaldabaoth and yaldabaoth's ultimate goal in trying to achieve some sort of divinity that really doesn't exist, which is the same thing that we kind of do throughout our lives, of trying to achieve things that will never actually be achieved. Therefore, we and yaldabaoth are technically on the same goal, and since everything is ultimately part of humanity's lack, since it's all technically blurred between reality, fiction, and all these other concepts. Oh, I keep forgetting to take a picture of those things. But I think fundamentally, it's very important to note that we as creatures are technically in full control, with reality in full control of yaldabaoth. By that I mean yaldabaoth has full control over us. We are in the full control of yaldabaoth. Yaldabaoth controls all of us and controls the universe, because it controls our soul, because it is our soul. Fundamentally, we are yaldabaoth in a sort of way. And that's why sort of mystical, witchcraftian ideal things could possibly exist in physical form, but it would be utilizing yaldabaoth's ultimate control over the universe through our soul. You bend the will of yaldabaoth to your own will in order to make yaldabaoth do stuff. Then truly the revolutionary magical potential, the quote-unquote spiritual, even though it's actually utilizing the soul and not the spirit, potential would be in the everlasting death of the spirit, to get to the soul, and the soul truly, as her lack, to control the hands of Yaldabaoth to create certain things in existence. It'd be an idealistic set, and that could be why witchcraft works in reality and how it does, because it's been seen that witchcraft works. This could be possibly the reason why it works. I don't know, I just think that it's a really strange spiritual concept that the entire thing is ultimately in reliance to itself. But I guess in enough of thing that hyperstitions still make sense when you realize of the whole thing of this with time and such being just an endless eternal motion and not actually phases. Because of course things that exist in the present exist in the future. So of course it can bend the will of existing in the present and the future using the lack. Hyperstitions are just witchcraft. It uses the lack of the human spirit to bend the will of Yaldabaoth in order to create itself in reality after it's already been created in the past. And I guess that could also work in sort of socio-political things. Things that make themselves quote unquote real that aren't really real but make themselves exist in a way that can hire. Okay, so in Homestuck, I know it's strange to bring up Homestuck, but in Homestuck, gender is very hyperstitional in Homestuck, because in Homestuck, gender creates itself through beings. It goes from the guy in the future who creates the entire world, got the idea of gender from the people of the world that's created from the world he creates. So let's say 3 stages, because yes, we're gonna do the Trinity thing. There's the guy Caliborn's world, the main world of the alpha, the main world of the first kids. Let's just call them the beta kids, yeah, and then the alpha kids. Um, Caliborn gets the idea of gender from the alpha kids, and alpha kids came got the idea of gender from the beta kids, and the beta kids were ultimately created with the sort of idea of gender that Caliborn got from the alpha kids, given to the beta kids from Caliborn. So it's an infinite cycle using utilizing people to spread gender from the future to the past, to the past, to the present, to the present, to the future. But eternally, since time is all the same thing, gender has always existed and just goes through these people to realize itself. I'd say that's kind of what gender does here. But you see, ultimately, in Homestuck, gender doesn't actually exist in Homestuck. I mean, gender doesn't exist here, doesn't exist in fiction, because gender just doesn't exist. So it doesn't exist in Homestuck either. Gender doesn't exist in Homestuck, yet it makes itself real, but not actually real. That is how majority of social hyperstitions works. Like the hyperstitions that capitalism uses are social hyperstitions. Things that I guess you could claim really aren't real but make themselves influential, like a virus, the sort of virus of of the brain, a sort of disorderly infection. That's what hyperstitions usually work through, and I'd say that counts as hyperstitional. So of course, since hyperstitions exist, the blur between fiction and reality are even more proven, because now it's established that hyperstitions that usually work through fictions and such can also work through realities and such in the same way that it works through fictions and can tunnel through fictions and realities. Therefore, what is the actual distinction between any of these stages in any sort of form or word? Ultimately, fictions, realities, and all of these things are ultimately the same, and hyperstitions prove that, and hyperstitions prove their own existence, and proves the sort of witchcraftian existence that we live in. Do I make sense? I don't know if I'm making sense, but fundamentally, I guess there's a sort of spirituality that does exist to a sort of degree, but it's a nihilistic spirituality, something that doesn't truly exist. Well, it exists, but it doesn't truly exist as a thing. It exists as a lack of a thing. Therefore, nihilism is a spiritual concept. Nihilism is spiritual, and spirituality is nihilistic because it does. Even if it doesn't understand it, or it's deluded in the idea that it's some sort of desire, like Deleuze does. Deleuze keeps saying, "Oh, well, it's desire. It's not negation. It's not like lack. It's not anything." But ultimately, desire is lack. Desire is it's a spiritual thing. So nihilism, being lack, is spiritual and it's desired. So ultimately, spirituality is a nihilistic concept. And I don't know, I feel like you could have gotten that from Jim Jones' ceremony, you know. Just go listen to that guy. Listen to his tapes. Whatever. Don't listen to me, I don't know. And I guess that's really all I have to say for the moment. Have fun. I don't even know what techno-capital means. Yes, I do. I'm just lying. And the picture of Yaldabaoth eating his own tail would be adorable. It's a little snake with a lion head. I'm gonna save this on my computer. And here, I was playing Minecraft before, like a little parkour thing. I know, it's so strange. But now that finally finished Next Land, I don't really have much to do. So I don't know what I'm gonna do. So I'm probably going to be done for philosophy for a while until I get something more to do. Or I guess I could just keep going on the spirituality thing. Still need to read Nick Land and Deleuze and all that. Whatever, I'm kind of tired of it. I feel like Nick's Land's philosophy was really better than any other philosophy that I've really seen. It's just, I don't know. Well, I guess that's it. Bro, yeah, OMG. Okay, whatever. Um, yeah, I'm not crazy. Bye, guys.